coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
And you might be able to sweep all that stuff under the rug when Daddy Xi comes to town, but it's not going to stay under the rug. And you can put on a brave face for a day or a week. This happens a lot during Olympic Games. We know how it works. But I think we really have sort of exited the world of the Potemkin village and moved on to the Potemkin villagers. It's unsustainable, and it will end in tears.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined this week by editor James Poulos and managing editor Seth Barron, plus Ryan Williams, our publisher, and president may hop in a little bit down the line here. So a grab bag of topics this week. Feels like we've been talking about some of the same things because, there's a lot of big ongoing news stories, but other things to raise today, starting with Mr. Xi goes to San Francisco. I can never quite remember which name in a Chinese name is the first and which is the last, but Xi Jinping is coming to San Francisco, I believe, this very day. Wednesday is when we're recording. You'll hear us a day after, and they are going to meet to talk about a number of things, including, it seems, economic matters, although perhaps also the spy balloon, if y'all remember that little episode. But basically, it sounds like China wants the U.S. to ease up on what it perceives to be anti-Chinese economic tactics. We will see what, if anything, Biden has to say to Xi. But almost the main story so far that's emerged out of the whole event is that this whole thing is taking place in San Francisco, and the city has conspicuously made sudden efforts to clean up the homelessness population and the excrement on the street and all the unsightly marks of decay that have become a governing part of city life in blue America. When Gavin Newsom, governor of California, was called out on this, he doubled down and said, yeah, absolutely. We want the city to look good for our Chinese guest. This is a quote: anytime you put on an event, you have people coming to your house. You're going to clean up the house. You've got 21 world leaders. You've got tens of thousands of people coming from around the globe, end quote. And so why wouldn't you take efforts to clean up the streets? To which I respond, yeah, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it also for the citizens of San Francisco and afford them the same honor as you afford Chinese pseudo-monarchs? But I'm getting ahead of myself. What did you guys think about this whole episode?
I thought it was great. I like the idea of a Potemkin village, but it's real. You don't have to put up painted screens showing a clean city. You just clean up the city. It does sort of beg the question: why can't we just do that all the time? I also like that one of the things also on the agenda is to talk about. I guess Biden is going to ask Xi, or ask him very nicely, if they can stop poisoning tens of thousands of our citizens annually by not putting in so much fentanyl into our system.
Yeah, that might be nice.
It's good to to just put that request in. I mean, who knows who knows how he'll respond. But it's always, you can always ask, right? Let them say no. So yeah, it all seems pretty pathetic. Gavin Newsom talking about cleaning up the city and why wouldn't you do it? Yeah, he had some other great quote in there. I'm looking for it, but I can't find it. But yeah, he He's terrific. All in all, I got to say it's an A plus. It's an A plus effort.
Well, I read that quote, and what I thought was, yeah, you have people over at your house, you're going to clean up your people. That's what cleaning up the
Hmm.
city is. It's cleaning up the people. And the question that is haunting the city of San Francisco and the leadership in Sacramento and Silicon Valley is really just kind of grappling with the magnitude of what's being revealed by California governance. And so it's looming over the whole state, and in that sense, the whole country, and in some broader sense, probably the whole Western world. Is why are there so many people who need to be cleaned up? And the answers to that question are I think very unflattering to the regime. There are those who will insist that this is part of the plan. This is bio-Leninism. They want to create this demoralized, disfigured ooze of humanity, protean blob that can be just kind of guided into a great global petri dish. And there's something about that. On the other hand, people are responding to their environment, and when you have an environment which, whether intentionally created or not, has that adverse of an effect on people and drives them to the point of insanity and addiction and obesity and just all the kinds of decline that are so visible on the streets when people lift their heads from their phones and actually look about themselves. That speaks to a problem that is even more profound than malevolence or willful perversity. And you might be able to sweep all that stuff under the rug when Daddy She comes to town, but it's not going to stay under the rug, and you can put on a brave face for a day or a week. This happens a lot during Olympic Games. We know how it works, but I think we really have sort of exited the world of the Potemkin village and moved on to the Potemkin villagers. It's unsustainable, and it will end in tears.
I just want to say the quote that I was looking for, I found it.
Yeah.
When they asked Governor Newsom about it, he said, "That's true."
Yeah.
Because it's true.
It's true because it's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. He kind of has a certain Biden-esque way with words, but in the body of someone who kind of delivers them with more confidence. Pretty strange.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of his seminal feature, and it's signally lacking from a lot of other political spaces, right and left, right? Is just that bluff, come at me, bro, kind of confidence where he'll just actually double down on it and stand there with his face hanging out and just say, what are you going to do about it? Literally, what are you going to do about it? We view you as subaltern peasants who aren't worth cleaning up the streets for. And only when, quote, 21 world leaders and tens of thousands of people from around the globe come in do we consider it a matter of importance to have pleasant and non, disease ridden environments. But when you're here, whatever. It's like whatever, bro. I do think it's true because it's true. Sort of reminds one in inverse of the Bill Clinton. It depends on what the meaning of is, or even more recently, Megan Rapinoe. I don't know, missed some inconsequential and boring shot since nobody cares about women's soccer anyway, and something went wrong, I guess, in her game, and she was like, "If there is a God, this is proof that there's not a God." Which had a weird sort of like, which had sort of a mystical logic to it. It's like, well, it's
Right.
true that, proof really, the structure of proof itself really only makes sense if there is a God. So you're right. This logic can only hold good, like all logic, if in fact there is a God. And so therefore it must be wrong. Anyway, yeah, it is, as James and Seth have both said, it's completely despicable. It's also totally to be expected, and I guess they just sort of think like they're untouchable. Like there's no way that this will lead to any sort of electoral consequences because people are so scared of the bad orange man. And the last thing I'll add is that James is, of course, exactly right that this is the sort of spiritual depression. The fact that these circumstances are this way at all represents a sort of spiritual depression that you can't sweep under the rug forever. And it's also one to which China itself is not immune, as I gather. The fact that she is out here talking to us about his economy to begin with does speak to, like, okay, so our American solution to slovenly decay is just to let it kind of slobber all over the street until somebody important comes along. Another opportunity, another possibility is just to put people in camps and, like, crack down on them and shove them back into their homes until they look like they're complying, and to ignore them that way. But I mean, in some way, it's like Newsom and Xi are the same guy. They're both like, who cares about the people? And it doesn't seem as if either one of these civilizations is really prepared to face up to what it would take to actually deal with these problems. Ryan, since you've just joined us, is there anything you want to say about Xi Jinping in San Francisco before we move on to greener pastures, so to speak?
Well, not knowing what you covered, my fault. Apologies. Just that I'm sure you guys have covered all the ground, but I was joking with a mutual friend of ours, an old Claremonster, as I was driving here hurriedly to try to make this podcast and failing. It would be funny if, sort of gallus humor, and I'm joking, people funny, but funny if, like, the homeless people just never came back to San Francisco and people were like, well, Newsom, where'd the homeless people go? And he's like, don't worry about it. They're on the permanent world tour. You won't see them again. By the way, I have some cheap furniture to sell you, made by a new source of labor that we're hiding in the mountains.
Right, exactly. I mean, yeah, doesn't it sort of feel as if, I mean, there is this weird pattern that I've noticed sort of progressives do adopt, where they'll destroy everything by way of apparently compassionate but ultimately very foolhardy, like, neglect of their duties and of law and order. And then when things get bad enough, they will then clamp down with exactly the policies that the right wing is always accused of advocating, but, like, in extremis, because now things are so bad that it's all you can do. And, like, the a while back when Biden was having to release some funds for the border wall, it sort of felt like that as well. And this feels here like, yeah, isn't it ultimately, once you do let things get so bad to the point where people can't even, like, pull themselves off the street into a public toilet, ultimately you are heading in a direction where the natural next step is going to be some sort of gruesome authoritarianism. Like, not to be morbid, but it just seems like this all of these sort of leftist policies ultimately end up as being far right policies in the end. Or,
Yeah,
like,
and it's just, in case anyone were wondering, a lot of us had concluded this in various ways, separately and on different occasions. But if anyone is wondering, yes, it is in fact the case that a lot of this is just purposeful. A lot of these policies and their attendant pathologies can be fixed, even by the left, when they want to, but they don't. Yeah. So it's
yeah.
it's the newest data point, I think, in that explains the declining confidence many in this country have, even the non-political, in our ruling class, and the continued descent into cynicism about what the influential people in policy, government, and its sort of satellite joined at the hip industries of our ruling class. Um, it's just, what can you conclude from this whole exercise in San Francisco, but that most of the things with a bunch of negative externalities that the left does are on purpose. So I hope a lot of people observe that and conclude that, because the only way to recover and start doing something serious about this is to acknowledge what we're dealing with. So that's the one, I guess, silver lining of this farce that is the Asian summit, or what, I forget what it's called, whatever it is going on in San Francisco. I also heard one commentator from Politico, of all places, their morning roundup is useful if you want to just get a quick take on what official DC thinks about what's going on in official DC. And one of the lines was, well, if Xi had his way, he'd just meet with corporate leaders in San Francisco all week and ignore
Hmm.
Biden. but diplomacy calls, so he has to talk to Biden.
Yeah.
This is as much a commercial trip for Xi.
I believe he uses he, him pronouns,
We
Ryan.
should just
Although,
start calling him Zingerang
yeah,
or something, and wrong, improperly pronoun him. It'd be funny.
yeah.
Yeah,
Zizim.
it's really a commercial trip because China's got various challenges on that front, and then on the side, I guess he has to stoop to meet with Biden, and also I don't know if you guys mentioned this, but it's also kind of a reset with relations with China that have kind of been semi-frozen since Pelosi visited Taiwan. And so in that way, we're kind of back to square one from 2 years ago. And I don't mean to say that we need to be cozy with the Chinese, but there are all sorts of ways controlling fentanyl chemicals to, making sure we're in touch so we don't blunder our way into some conflict. All that stuff is now being restarted after it was scuttled, I think, foolishly by Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, which at the time was lauded by various neocon types. But from a realist, old school foreign policy perspective and an old school diplomatic perspective, say of TR or someone from a previous era, would have just been normal good business practices in diplomacy, which is be clear to each other, say what you mean, don't bluster without anything to back it up. And so in that ways, we're kind of back to square one with China in a time or in the last, over the last month, there's lots of indications that China has to, as our senior fellow Mark Halperin put it in an early CRB piece, and which ran on Real Clear Politics the other day. China spent a month basically lighting the world on fire in various ways
Hmm.
because they think it will hurt America, and it is hurting our prestige and some of our allies. So
Hmm.
lots high stakes are high, and this week in San Francisco, I wish it wasn't the case that most of us have zero confidence in the Biden administration or the principal himself to do much of anything in our interest or other than just sort of get back to square one with China. So I guess that's progress, but it's from a low spot that was our own fault in recent years at a
Yeah.
time when we need to be much smarter and more serious about this
It's
country. Yeah.
It's progress in the sense that, like, opening businesses and getting people their jobs back after the government shut down businesses for COVID
Yeah.
represents progress. It's like we
Yeah,
fixed the problem
that's
that
right. That's
caused.
good. I like that, Spencer. It's the international diplomatic version of Biden bragging about the
Right.
biggest job gains in presidential history
Yeah, exactly.
coming out of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, we went from literally 0 jobs to millions of jobs. Yeah, Seth was joking before you showed up, Ryan, that, like, maybe Biden will file a bureaucratic request for just slightly less fentanyl pumped directly into Americans' veins from Chinese factories, and it might be filed within, like, 5 to 7 business days, and would just sort of meekly hope that Biden asks for something.
It
Um
has to go through uh, the Chinese Communist Party process of public notice and comment, and then maybe
Yeah,
they'll
yeah.
go.
Notarized, that whole bureaucratic system is really it takes a while. A lot of red tape. Okay, well, more to come on that shortly as we find out what transpired at the meeting, but let us attend ye now to the tale of Nikki and the pseuds. Nikki Haley, whom you may recall from the Republican presidential jockeying, or you may not, since normal people probably haven't been paying that much attention to the mud fights that are going on in the puddles at Trump's feet during this presidential runoff. Nikki Haley's been getting some buzz in the press. She had like a bump, although it was a bump from not very much to slightly more, although still not very much, in terms of support, especially in some of the advanced states. Now she's had a run of bad clips circulating, especially to do with social media. One that sounded to me truly unhinged on a Fox News show where she's talking about what she would do. She said immediately after getting into office. I assume she means in this capacity, although maybe this is like her number one priority. Um, First of all, she wants something that I have actually floated also on this podcast, which is to make the algorithms public so we can see whether the social media companies are lying about how they suppress and don't suppress different voices. That's whatever. But this next part is truly bonkers. She says every person on social media should be verified by their name. First of all, it's a national security threat. So you hear that, Groiper Anon 7952 with 25 followers, your tweets are a national security threat. But she says, to unmask the various bots, the famous bots, the notorious bots whom you've all heard of from China and Russia that are supposedly interfering with our elections. And then, and this is a remarkable rationale for what sounded like a quite invasive presidential edict she was contemplating, is you're going to get some civility when people know their name is next to what they say, and they know their pastor and their family member is going to see it. Um, Interestingly, I'm not so sure that we've ever talked in detail on this podcast about like the pseuds issue. This has been sort of a matter of some dispute within conservative circles, whether 'tis better, 'tis nobler in the mind to tweet under one's own name or and suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous cancellation, or take arms behind a pseudonymous account and by opposing Globo Homo end it. I just made that up on the spot, by the way, so everybody should be very proud of me. But in any case, I'm not sure what everybody's opinion is about the question of pseudonymous tweets in itself. But it's like, even if you don't think that tweeting behind a pseudonym is all that admirable, uh, this is a bit extreme. No, what's Haley up to here? Do you think she just really believes in this, or is there some sort of play being made?
Oh, there's certainly a play going on. It's on behalf of whom is the question that I'm reflecting on these days. I mean, cards on the table, I think that Nikki Haley is presenting as a menace, if is not really a menace in the bosom of her heart. We can't tell. We do not yet have the technology to read the hearts of men. But based on what she's saying and doing, based on what she seems to be angling for, and based on her total willingness to uh, update neoconservatism for the age of digital tyranny, I must conclude that she is a menace. So you can spend 2 seconds on Twitter and watch as many who are pseuds and many who are not are dunking on Nikki with comments along the lines of, did you know that the founding fathers were pseuds when they wrote the Federalist Papers, and so on and so forth. I won't rehearse those arguments here. I will simply say that while the right has been flailing around, the left has been moving with great discipline and rigor in locking down online life and, in effect, nationalizing ever more of what we all, until very recently, pretty blithely assumed would be a great and glorious private sector of uh, wonder-inducing innovation. That's not what's happening, and we can argue about why that's not happening, or we can recognize that unless we manage to rally around some sort of plan to ensure that the Constitution does not stop at technology's edge, then ambitious people who are nominally Republicans are going to simply adopt the cyber tyranny of the left and present themselves as just being like the people you actually want in charge of that apparatus. This is the debate that's playing out in tech right now. You have relatively more based tech bros versus relatively more woke tech employees and tech journalists and tech regulators. And it's not an argument about, are we building like a tool that is going to reduce us to its own tools? It's really an argument about, no, who gets to have their hands on the controls. And unfortunately, there is a small group of people who are like, maybe the machine's too powerful, but their answer is to literally call in airstrikes and blow up all the servers. We can't have nice things. This is all madness, and there needs to be, and there can easily be, a better way put forward. But someone's got to put it forward, and someone's got to do the work of just rallying support around the radical idea that the Constitution should apply to our life on the internet. So let's do that. And if we don't, then it's not just going to be Nikki Haley. It's going to be, a clown car full of people who will reduce their campaigns to arguing why their identity makes them best qualified to be the hiero priest of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, there is, as James very eloquently put it, there's this kind of looming question that I'm not even sure if, I mean, others who are more versed in the minutia of American history will correct me on this, but it doesn't seem to me that America has ever quite faced this particular question before, which is like an actual new dimension of existence opened up, not just a new object or a new physical territory, but a whole new way of existing in the world and interacting. And so the question about how to apply American principles to it, even if at that point when we reached that stage we had, made it there with our Constitution intact, which we hadn't, that question just became extremely fraught and difficult. The closest thing and the very, very imperfect analogy that I can think of is, all those debates over what to do with the new territories, including what to do about slavery, but what to do generally with sort of new territory as it was acquired. And so, you know, whenever we have these discussions off the back of something some politician has said, I can't help but feel like we are way behind the curve, and the politicians, conservative, Republican, and Democrat, are sort of flailing around in the only way they know how with these these sort of blunt instruments of law, um, which seems like part, at least, of why Nikki Haley, who does not have the wherewithal or equipment to think through these sorts of things in a nuanced or subtle way, is going from 0 to a million on like let's outlaw pseuds. Um, it just seems clear that that is the opposite of the kind of thing we need. I'm sympathetic to the people who say, and people have argued on our site before, you ought to reveal your name. The threats against you are not as grand as you sort of imagine, and you should just like stand behind what you say. And there's something to the effect to the point that people are nicer when they have to look each other face to face, and there's a certain degree of humility that comes with it. But there's also a good argument for, especially in certain circumstances, if you do really fear for your job or whatever, to having the freedom of saying what's really on your mind. And it seems perfectly reasonable to do that. At the very least, even if you don't think it's reasonable, people should be allowed to do it by law. Yeah, I mean, this is just like, it doesn't seem like it's going to do Nikki Haley any favors, and it underscores again the, to me, rather dismaying fact that there's not that many people with like their feet underneath them in this race on the Republican side. I liked our friend Mike Solana tweeted like, all you have to do is not be weird, and then Nikki Haley just was like, let's outlaw the pseuds. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't bode well to me for her prospects.
I wonder, just a few thoughts. I mean, building on what James's theme in a way, maybe I suspect she got a briefing from national security types who probably brought up, AI and large language models and fake videos and all that, and twinned it with the establishment obsession with the alleged outsized influence of misinformation on social media perpetrated by, as Haley said, bots or whatever. She would have demonstrated um, a more promising acquaintance with our current domestic political atmosphere if she'd at least dropped an asterisk there to run down the modern notion of misinformation and disinformation, which, from folks like our friend Mike Benz at his organization, a Trump administration veteran, has pointed out, a lot of this running down or denigrating of misinformation has much more to do with, as far as our sort of intelligence community and ruling class is concerned, not much more, but at least as much to do with quote unquote misinformation emanating from uh, domestic sources, that is, bad people holding bad opinions or manipulating others to affect bad election outcomes. which, up until maybe mid-century or even quite a bit after that was just known as the flow of information in a boisterous republic and deliberative democracy, and otherwise known as politics. It just continues the troubling trend of our quote unquote betters thinking that the normal American people are just completely unable to consume, sift, and evaluate information, and really a good portion of the country is just unable to participate in democracy anymore. Um, and digital technology has accelerated this problem, and so we need to. This is just another way to quote unquote safeguard our democracy. All right, I'm going to quit with the quote unquotes. It's getting annoying, I realize. There's that part of it. That whole universe or that whole phenomenon is troubling. Nikki Haley seems to not to be able to demonstrate any nuanced take on that or appreciation for the extent to which a lot of these tools are directed domestically as well as against foreign misinformation and bots, etc. I would also like to twin it with her comment the other day about, the immigrant. She was at a town hall. I assume it was in Iowa. I could be wrong. I think it was in Iowa. And there was video of it where she said, our immigration policy we need to go to our corporate, this is me paraphrasing Nikki, we need to go to our corporate partners, go to our corporations, go to our businesses and say, what immigration do you need? What workers do you need? And then we make that happen through legal immigration. So if you take the two of them together, it's if we didn't need any further confirmation that Haley represents the kind of consensus of official ruling class Washington and corporate America, I think these two events confirm it definitively. And in the current political, media, institutional, ideological landscape, one of those on its own would probably be disqualifying. Both of them together are very troubling. Now, we can take solace in the fact that there's no way she's going to be the nominee. I really don't think anyone besides Trump is going to be the nominee. We've been reconfirming and reconfirming our assessment along those lines for a while, with a couple of dissents, maybe even from you, Spencer. But it's not been a good week for Nikki Haley, at least for a certain type of Republican or conservative who regards with increasing alarm the various thumbs on the scales of American democracy being placed there by our ruling class and its allies in corporate America or elsewhere. I don't want to be too conspiratorial, but it just seems tone deaf on so many levels. And I think that's what a lot of people are concluding. And one last thought, which is not original, I found it online and it seemed interesting and compelling to me, which is thank God for social media and the fact that in a previous age, I think there would have been fewer obstacles for someone like Haley as merely the consensus pick of various powerful and wealthy factions on the right. It would have been a lot easier for her to mount a more vigorous primary challenge. And given her level of knowledge, sophistication, and nuance that has been demonstrated over the last week, we can be glad that there's more transparency now from a variety of fronts, including digital technology, cameras everywhere, and quick virality with the quick virality of all sorts of things, including stupid, mindless memes and schlock entertainment and our bum fights and high school fights and all the just trash that circulates online. But also, the virality can work in our favor when you have a large portion of the right quickly see the deficiencies of politicians over the course of a week rather than over the course of many months and maybe too late or almost too late halfway through a primary. So various silver linings. I thought it was pretty revealing about Haley's deficiencies this week.
It's funny because I was going to ask, well, what in Nikki Haley's mind is the notional problem with having pseudonymous accounts posting things? Like, what is the alleged problem? But I guess you actually just spelled it out. It's that, well, people might amplify her gaps. So there's that. Yeah, I mean, she just seems like the classic. I mean, isn't she the candidate for all the people who don't want a Republican to win? Like, the bulwark people, dispatch people. I don't know. I mean, she seems completely terrible, but that's just me.
Yeah. I mean, that's succinctly put. I mean, I should note, Ryan, that my dissents from the Trump is going to be the nominee prediction are avowedly wishful thinking. They have almost nothing to do with what I think is going to happen, and everything to do with a certain
Yeah.
despondency.
Well,
And
you admitting it's wishful thinking puts you in better company than Ken Griffin, who seems ready to set yet another pile of money on fire because it's reported that he's thinking of backing Nikki Haley, which led me to lament to one of our friends today. I mean, I just don't understand it at a certain level. I mean, the man's obviously very smart. He's a billionaire. I'm sure he's smarter than I am. And yet, politically, seems kind of naive or I don't know, maybe it's some play I'm not seeing. That's entirely possible. That happens all the time in politics. I think there's probably a pretty good chance that she could be vice president, Trump's vice
mm,
presidential pick. It'll be, a lot of people. You talk to real activists in South Carolina, and they've never liked Haley or have not liked her for a while. And part of the claim is she's just simply ambitious and unprincipled. And uh, the never Trumpers will think that's rich, considering that she'll be alongside Trump, who they think is unprincipled and bad. But anyway, so because she to me would serve a very useful function for Trump, which would be, he may talk himself into the proposition that she's helps him in the suburbs with women or highly educated whites or whatever, and so in a way would make a dream ticket in terms of coalitional turnout. So that could certainly be in the cards. So that's, I guess,
mm.
I'll walk back slightly what I said before, which is we can take solace in the fact that she won't be the nominee. Well, she might be the vice presidential nominee, and thus the heir apparent in the way American politics works. Not to mention the fact that her principal will be 80 years old when he takes office, or give or take change. So
Oh
the
my
the
gosh, is
best
she
thing.
our Kamala Harris? Is that what's
No,
happening?
no, no. But then all that said, I'll be generous and just say I hope people who are in a position to do it advise her um, that this is a mistake and that she should think more clearly about this.
Mm.
And she's, she so far is not walking it back at all. So let's hope cooler heads prevail and someone gets Nikki Haley and explains to her the problem with this proposition that or with this solution that she's proposed.
I just want to say to all those people out there with the pleasant luxury of having piles of money to light on fire, if you're thinking about immolating one of your giant wads of cash, don't do that. Just go to claremont.org/donate and send it our way. We'll do something useful with it. Um, and with that plug, let's turn to another topic, one last topic about New York Governor Kathy Hochul. And this is going to be kind of maybe a jumping off topic. We don't have to confine ourselves to this particular news item, but Hochul recently announced that she's launching what effectively amounts to an online surveillance program. This includes watching over citizens' social media postings, and all in the name of countering hate, everybody's favorite objective. She says it's painful to see the cruelty with which New Yorkers are treating each other everywhere, from college campuses to our streets to schools to playgrounds, even as they're entering their houses of worship. That last little Philip will give you the perhaps will clue you into the fact that she's here using anti-Semitism and the perception of Israel and the sort of negative attacks on Jews in America since the war broke out over there as the pretext for this particular crackdown. And to me, it's always sort of uninteresting to listen to what people like Hochul actually say about their, reasons for wanting to shut people up and censor speech. But it's more interesting to ask a question that Seth raised earlier when we were texting about this whole notion that cancel culture, so called, has now become like a tool of right and left. And even though the right tends to deplore it more often, that's only because they are more often on the losing side of it. And when something like anti Semitism comes up, where there is sort of significant appetite for, say, keeping students off of hiring lists when they participate in pro-Palestine rallies, then all sorts of conservatives suddenly go in for closing off people's access to employment and so forth on the basis of their political opinions. Do you guys buy this? Is there in fact a difference between like watching what kids say in college about Palestine versus the firing NFL coaches for being against Black Lives Matter? And are we ultimately really just in a dispute over what is beyond the pale to say? Or is there something kind of more principled? Is there some other principle, I guess, that we can reach for to adjudicate these cases?
I've got one.
Okay,
Reason.
good. Reason, prudence. Get
Uh,
out. Shut this podcast down. Yeah, yeah. Go on.
yeah, well, it gets back to this dispute, which probably a lot of people missed in the recent weeks. So the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, who they've ranked the status of liberty and free speech and all the rest on campuses, and they give a ranking or whatever they do to campuses across the nation. And I will state at the outset that FIRE does a lot of great work, including helping a lot of victims of cancel culture on campus, which are, of course, right wing or libertarian of some sort, usually, um, file lawsuits and protect their tenure and all that. That's all good work, and I'm glad FIRE is doing it. I'm glad the organization exists for that reason. But they gave Hillsdale a kind of I don't know what grade they get, maybe an A minus or something. And their objection was that Hillsdale is not a completely free speech zone, that they have a mission which has references to Christianity and American civics and liberty, and that does not mean, in Hillsdale's understanding, or Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale's understanding, that does not mean a free for all on campus, either in terms of what students can say, or what groups they can form, or what kind of speakers they'll allow on campus. This to FIRE was unacceptable, and there was a battle of op-eds in the Wall Street Journal on Larry Arnn pushing back and offering a kind of mission-based, truth-based, reason-based vision of the liberal arts campus, which says, we allow a decent amount of freedom of thought, of course, but freedom of speech on campus has its limits. After all, we have a mission that we're trying to pursue. So I think those principles, that is to say, using our reason to understand the difference between malicious speech that constitutes mostly lies, activism in furtherance of bad and evil causes. We can adjudicate between those and other forms of speech, which might be conducive to good learning on campus, conducive to a healthy civic life. And it just leads back to old arguments about the First Amendment and what it's for. And I think if you take FIRE's position, or the any cancel culture is bad position, in other words, if you take the completely neutral position on speech and its content, then you're led into the absurdities of modern First Amendment law, which protect, strip clubs as a form of expression, and thus a form of political speech somehow, or even take flag burning for that matter, um, in First Amendment law. Now, you could tolerate all manner of things, but you don't need to say that it's good, or even that it's equally not good, or just neutral. You have to make judgments about these things, and we have to be guided by our reason. I think the libertarian position and the liberal position, as it's, I think, at the foundation of maybe some of the things that the objectors to cancel culture, full stop, bring out. It's mistaken. It's anarchic. It ultimately rests on one of the central propositions of the postmodern left, which has gotten us into a lot of these places, which is that we can't really know reasonably what's good and bad. The only thing we can really know is the hard sciences. All the rest is a matter of power and narrative. So, yeah, I think we can distinguish between good and bad cancel culture.
Yeah. And, like, okay, people like Glenn Greenwald have been dunking on the right, saying, oh, so you all hated cancel culture for the last few years, but now all of a sudden you love it. Now, I do think there is a distinction, because what we saw in the last few years was essentially the government putting its thumb on the scale. And as the Twitter files revealed, indeed, the government was using these platforms to throttle speech it didn't like. So, in that sense, uh, there's something a little unfair. And obviously, I don't think the government should be engaged in that type of activity. But as they said, you have freedom of speech, but not freedom of speech or freedom from consequences. So, look, if Bill Ackman wants to, you know, light piles of money on fire by, humiliating kids who sign anti-Semitic manifestos, well, I guess that's his right. Um, so, look, ideally, everybody would be able to say things, and even if they were inflammatory, they could go home, and it wouldn't be a problem. But we're in this world where the left rules most of our institutions, and they have no problem with silencing or anything their enemies. And so I feel like we would be foolish not to fight back uh, using the same tools and tactics. They may be ugly, but nobody wins by letting your opponent take all the mete out all the punishment.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously supposed to be a distinction, and in fact, this is a distinction that the left and some rather gullible folks on the right will cite between government action and private choices. And in the realm of private choices, you're supposed to be able to praise or blame certain decisions, but not to outlaw or prohibit any course of action. And then in the realm of effective government intervention, well, the government isn't supposed to be involved, and we can sort of rightly say that that's wrong. Part of the problem, it seems like, is the problem that obtains in many other domains, which is the effective blurring of government and private action and the very close collusion between one government party, namely the Democrats, and the people that wield basically all the censorship power in the digital sphere. So it's hard to, you know, really get behind that distinction. It does make me feel squishy that we have to sort of navigate on the basis of prudence. But as Ryan is saying, like, there actually isn't a coherent position on this that is totally neutral or that recognizes all forms of speech as equally valid and indeed even as speech. Um, so you do, I guess, have to at least strenuously censure certain positions over others. And in that, it's true. Like, we are just in a debate over where the lines of the Overton or the width of the Overton window is going to be. The fact that we disagree about that so strongly represents the depths of our dispute. And yeah, I don't know. It does seem like both sides are sort of saying there must be a limit. It's just that one side thinks the limit ought to be posting memes about Hillary Clinton, and the other thinks it ought to be rallying in support of genocidal maniacs. And I guess I'm comfortable having that fight, honestly. And I'm also comfortable saying that I don't trust Kathy Hochul to be the one that wields government power as part of that enterprise. So yeah, it's a matter with a lot of gray areas, but also it's not to say that something has gray areas is often used as a way of just throwing up one's head about it completely, and I don't really think that's the move here.
Yeah, and a liberal society in the old sense, especially one that's a regime of self-government with a certain view of the good, um, and a view of rights, of course, natural rights, is under no obligation to tolerate indefinitely the intolerant. Um, Now, our libertarian friends would object and say, well, once you make that argument, the other side, when they get into power, will wield that against you. And my response would be, well, they already are, and they continue to ratchet it up. And ultimately, self government can't be a suicide pact. And so it just speaks to the bigger problem, which is our divisions are so deep in some ways, especially on the activist. If you take the activist or academic modern left versus regular America, or even the right writ large, that the thinking through these topics reasonably becomes much more difficult because you have so little in common as a matter of first principles, that to make the argument that I've been making, or that we've been making, which would have been just very commonsensical 100 years ago, which is that we can all reason together about what sorts of expression and speech we shouldn't tolerate. It's very difficult. It is difficult to think clearly about it because so much is at stake as the republic continues to degenerate, and we drift into tribes that seem to want to, at least on either side's own understanding, not just do normal politics within the 40-yard lines, but rather to kind of eradicate the other side, or silence it semi-permanently, or disenfranchise it. It's we're in a difficult spot, and I just don't think the solution cannot be, the kind of free for all view of speech is good and more speech is better. We have to be more discerning, and it will involve, in the current political divisions, it will involve all the normal older ways of doing politics before our kind of legalistic bureaucratic apparatus stifled so much of it out, which is to say, to debate together, to assemble electoral coalitions, to persuade one's fellow citizens, and then to begin to kind of shift or realign the common ground of agreement, including on first principles. That is a tall order, and
Hmm.
I realize it is. It's that work has to be done uh, if you're going to realize any kind of common good and shared vision of justice, and try to get back to playing policy politics within the 240-yard lines.
Yeah, ain't no other way out. I mean, it does kind of come back to a thing I'm constantly banging on about, that so many of the classical texts of classical liberalism all take for granted an implicit Overton window. Like, there's always been kind of a series of things in the background that people just don't have to acknowledge because it's so taken for granted, and now it's not, so we have to deal with that problem as it comes to us. Okay, well said, Ryan, and everybody. Let us now remind our listeners to read the damn site. It's our policy to remind you that we have a website. It's called AmericanMind.org, and you can go there to find sensible and often, I think, penetrating essays on various topics, including the ones that we've been dealing with today, although not limited to. I am pretty sure that this essay is within the last time I did this segment. I hope I'm right, because I really do want to recommend an essay called "Carving Turkey Away from NATO." It's by Julie Hartman, who thank you. That was my
I
title.
I haven't seen that one yet. Excellent work
Hey.
there, Spencer.
Thank you. I'm here all evening. It's but Julie Hartman is a friend. Full disclosure, she works with Dennis Prager. She got her own show. And this is something that I did not know. I go on her show sometimes to talk about literature, so I had no idea that she was such a sharp mind when it came to international relations. But this is a really detailed and historically informed piece about what Iran's long game might be in the way of Turkey. So, sort of pointing us toward something a little bit that's out of sight that maybe people aren't thinking of because they're distracted by the big shiny object going on in Israel. And Julie just brings not only the sort of many decades long history of conflict in the region to bear, but also a very astute analysis, speculative, net by necessity, but quite plausible, about what Iran and even maybe China and Hezbollah might be thinking, each in its turn. So, Carving Turkey Away from NATO, Julie Hartman, it's up on the site. Ryan, what do you got?
I have a fun piece from one of our very old friends and board member, longtime faculty member, Edward Erler. Ed taught for many years at Cal State San Bernardino. He's an OG Claremonster. He was. I just want to give some of these biographical details because I know some folks find this interesting. Ed was part of that first generation of Claremont Graduate School before it was Claremont Graduate University students, the first generation of Jaffa students in graduate school who were around in the late 60s when Leo Strauss taught here. So, Ed's been writing about American politics, California politics, immigration, citizenship. He's a deep student of Locke, the right to property, Madison, all that stuff, and a critic of birthright citizenship as well. But he has something that's a little more off the beaten path. So Ed has been joking in various Publius sessions over the years that the kind of the logic of modern rights on the left being based not in reason but rather in preference, identity, that is will, doesn't seem to have a stopping point in principle, and that might lead to transgressions that we don't quite appreciate the radicalness of, or we don't appreciate where they might go. And one of the things he said in recent years is, well, we've destroyed the ground of nature for sexual relationships. We've destroyed it for marriage. Um, uh, what is there left to transgress? Well, there's incest, of course. There's pedophilia. The term minor attracted persons is now in currency. A reinvention of pederasty or pedophilia. And so Ed sort of takes it to the final frontier, as it were, and he wrote a piece called "The Rise of Ethical Cannibalism." Uh, the subtitle is "We Should Have Seen This Coming." And so Ed's joke in recent years at Publius would be, "Oh yeah, what's left to transgress? Well, there's one thing, but I'm not even going to say it. I can't say it. You'll have to get me a drink and ask me privately." But now he's written it publicly, which is to say, it doesn't seem to him, and I would say from just a principled reasoning standpoint or a ontological standpoint or an epistemological standpoint for the postmodern left, Ed is right. That why shouldn't ethical cannibalism be all right? Why shouldn't this thing that was universally regarded as barbaric by most of the civilized world for thousands of years, why shouldn't it emerge as a new cause of identity? That is to say, if two consenting adults, two lovers, take your pick. I mean, the permutations become grisly and sort of frightening. If people wanted to eat each other in mutual congress, why couldn't they? Or if they got someone to consent to be eaten, why couldn't they? There have been sort of scattered cases of this across Western Europe in recent decades. So he just makes that case, and it's a bit tongue in cheek, but just a bit, and it's Swiftian, of course, in some ways. And Ed has some fun. There's a couple laugh lines in here, but his deep point is deadly serious. And I would encourage everyone to resist the urge to say, "Oh, that's ridiculous," because we're kind of there. And he uses a couple of recent films which treat the topic of cannibalism as something other than you know something other than a thing done in the wilds of the jungle in some primitive place that that all normal right thinking people would condemn. So he just walks through that thought experiment, and I'm glad he did it, and I'm interested to see if anyone flips out over it. But, it's a provocative thing worth reading. I will also add, Spencer, just on a personal note, kind of because this seems interesting to me. I want to recommend someone to read a damn book by a certain damn sibling of Spencer's,
Oh,
and that is Faith Moore's A Christmas Carol. I'm right? That's your sister.
she is my sister, yes, and that's her book. I'm proud and delighted,
Her
but
debut novel, right?
yeah, her debut novel.
Yeah.
A little have you read it, Ryan?
I have not,
Oh,
although
okay.
I'm
It didn't
thinking
seem like
I
something you would
might
go
buy
to.
it for a family member or two. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I mean, honestly, let me put it this way. I would not have bought this book if I weren't related to my sister because it's, like it's about girl bosses and feminism and womanhood, and it's a very sly sort of critique of girl bossery, among other things.
Yeah.
But if she weren't my sister and if I hadn't bought it, I would have been missing out because it really is just like totally independently of my being related to her, a extremely charming, touching, and well executed take on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So good
Yeah.
Christmas gift
A
to buy,
Christmas
and thank you for
Carol
plugging it.
by
Yeah,
Faith Moore, spelled with a K.
spelled
Yeah,
with a K. That's right. Well done. Thank you very much.
of course.
Um, awesome. All right. And with that, James and Seth have both been tackled by the feds. So we're going to close out and thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you like what you hear on our show, you will love the stuff that we do elsewhere as well. We've already mentioned AmericanMind.org. There's also ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where you can find our sister publication and sign up to receive the Dead Tree version and have the unique and ever vanishing, dwindling pleasure of holding a physical magazine in your hands. You can also donate to support us at claremont.org/donate. I mentioned that earlier. And you can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. If you have not already, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. That will help you get new episodes. And leave us 5 stars if you don't mind altogether, or at least keep your bad opinions to yourself, because more people find us when more people rate us highly. Share the show, rate it well, text it to your group chat, talk to your friends and family about it at Thanksgiving dinner. All that, much appreciated. And thanks finally to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.